The phone rang, shattering the normalcy of an ordinary afternoon. The sound echoed through the house, breaking the serene silence that had settled in. It was a call that would forever alter the course of Sarah's life. Sarah, a dedicated teacher living a modest life, answered. She had always been the pillar of her family, balancing work and home with grace. Her days were filled with lesson plans, and her evenings with family dinners. The voice on the other end delivered news that would change everything. She had inherited $20 million from a distant relative she barely remembered. The words seemed surreal, almost like a dream. At first it was disbelief, then elation. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. She could hardly believe her ears. The weight of financial burdens that had long plagued her seemed to lift instantly. Sarah and her husband Mark had struggled financially for years. They had faced countless sleepless nights worrying about bills, debts, and the future of their children. The inheritance felt like a miracle. This inheritance felt like a golden ticket, a chance to finally breathe easy. They hugged each other tightly, tears of joy streaming down their faces. It was a moment of pure relief and happiness. Dreams they had put on hold, a new home, travel, financial security, danced before their eyes. They began to make plans, envisioning a future filled with possibilities. The world seemed to open up before them. That night, they celebrated with champagne and excited whispers about the future. They toasted to new beginnings, to dreams coming true, and to the life they had always wanted. Little did Sarah know, the euphoria wouldn't last. The initial joy began to give way to a creeping sense of unease. Questions about the inheritance and its implications started to surface. This unexpected windfall was about to plunge their lives into chaos, testing the very foundation of their marriage. Arguments erupted over how to manage the money, revealing deep-seated tensions and fears. The weight of the news settled in over the following days. $20 million. It was a life-changing sum, but it also brought with it a heavy burden of responsibility and decision-making. It was a life-changing sum. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. She had to navigate legalities, financial planning, and the expectations of those around her. As Sarah grappled with the reality of her newfound wealth, a storm was brewing, one that threatened to tear her family apart. The money, which had seemed like a blessing, now loomed as a potential curse, testing their unity and resilience. Mark, usually a loving and supportive husband, seemed different. He had always been the rock in their relationship, the one who kept things steady and predictable. But lately, there was a shift in his behavior that Sarah couldn't ignore. There was a new tension in his demeanor, a glint in his eye that Sarah couldn't quite place. It was as if he was carrying a burden, something that weighed heavily on his mind, and it was starting to seep into their daily interactions. One evening, as they were discussing how to invest the money, Mark dropped a bombshell. They had been going over their options, talking about stocks, bonds, and real estate, when Mark suddenly changed the subject. "We should give some to my mom," he declared. Sarah was taken aback. This was not something they had ever discussed before, and the suddenness of the request left her reeling. "Your mom? How much are we talking about?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She needed to understand the full scope of what Mark was suggesting. "$1 million, Mark replied, his voice taking on a steely edge. The number hung in the air, almost tangible in its enormity. Sarah felt her heart race. She's getting old. Needs help around the house. It's only fair. $1 million. Sarah's mind reeled. She tried to process what Mark was saying, but it felt like too much, too fast. It wasn't that she disliked her mother-in-law, but $1 million was a huge chunk of money. They had plans for that money, dreams they had been nurturing for years. This request threatened to upend all of that. This inheritance was hers, wasn't it? Sarah thought about the years she had spent working hard, saving diligently, and planning for a future that now seemed uncertain. The room crackled with tension. The air was thick with unspoken words, and the silence between them was deafening. Sarah could feel the weight of Mark's expectation pressing down on her. Sarah's initial shock gave way to a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just a simple request. It was a demand that carried with it implications she wasn't ready to face. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, about expectations, about the delicate balance of power within their marriage. Sarah realized that this moment could define their future, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what that might mean. "No, Mark," Sarah finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not fair! This is my inheritance!" Mark's face hardened. "Don't be like that, Sarah. We're a family. We share everything." What followed was an argument unlike any they'd ever had. Accusations flew. Resentments, long buried, bubbled to the surface. Mark accused Sarah of being selfish, of forgetting about his family. Sarah countered, her voice rising in anger, that he was trying to control her money. The argument spilled over into the following days, a dark cloud hanging over their home. They barely spoke, the silence punctuated by bitter snipes and icy glares. Friends and family, drawn into the conflict, offered well-meaning but often unhelpful advice. Some sided with Mark, arguing that sharing the wealth was the right thing to do. Others whispered about prenuptial agreements and urged Sarah to protect her interests. Section 4. Whose money is it anyway? The question of the inheritance became a constant source of contention. What once was a loving and harmonious relationship began to fray at the edges. The money, instead of being a blessing, turned into a curse that slowly poisoned their interactions. Dinner table conversations were strained, filled with veiled barbs and passive-aggressive comments. The once lively and warm family gatherings now felt like battlegrounds, where every word was a potential landmine. Intimacy evaporated, replaced by a cold distance that seemed to grow with each passing day. Nights that were once filled with whispered dreams and shared laughter turned into silent vigils of resentment. "It's my money, earned by my family," Sarah argued, her voice laced with frustration. She felt a deep sense of injustice, believing that her hard-earned inheritance was being unfairly claimed. "Why should I have to share it with someone who feels entitled to it?" she questioned, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and hurt. To her, the money symbolized her family's legacy and her own independence. Mark countered with his own sense of injustice. He couldn't understand why Sarah was being so rigid and unyielding. To him, the money was a means to support their family, to ensure that everyone was taken care of. "It's not about entitlement," he retorted. "It's about family." Mark's voice was firm, but there was a hint of desperation. He wanted Sarah to see that his intentions were not selfish, but rooted in love and responsibility. "My mother needs help, and we have the means to provide it," he pleaded. Mark's mother had always been there for him, and now, in her time of need, he felt it was his duty to support her. "Why are you being so heartless?" he asked, his voice breaking. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their unresolved conflict. The truth was, both of them had valid points. Sarah's desire to honor her family's legacy and maintain her independence was just as important as Mark's wish to support his mother and ensure the well-being of their family. Sarah had every right to do as she pleased with her inheritance. It was a gift from her family, a symbol of their hard work and dedication. She felt a deep connection to it, and the thought of parting with it was painful. Mark, on the other hand, wasn't entirely wrong in thinking about his family's needs. He saw the inheritance as a way to provide for his mother, to give back to the woman who had given him so much. The problem lay in their inability to communicate, to find a compromise that honored both their feelings and perspectives. They needed to bridge the gap between them, to find a way to turn the inheritance from a source of conflict into a source of unity. Section 5. When family becomes a battlefield. The conflict began to seep beyond the walls of their home, poisoning relationships with extended family members. Mark's mother, initially unaware of the inheritance, was now privy to the drama. She, in turn, shared her version of the story with her other children, fueling the fire of resentment. Phone calls became battlegrounds, filled with accusations and recriminations. Family gatherings were strained, the air thick with unspoken tension. Sarah found herself caught in a web of animosity, her every word and action scrutinized and judged. The situation highlighted a painful truth. Money had the power to turn even the closest of families into adversaries. The inheritance, once a symbol of hope and opportunity, had become a wedge, driving them further and further apart.